Hi, everyone. Thank you, everyone, for viewing our first episode of this new revised Health Truth Exposed. So, our first podcast or first episode was not intended to be a part two. As I got going and I started thinking about it, I needed to give more information to help people. So, without any more, I'm just going to let you know this topic is actually still focusing on self-victimization, which has become a very big topic in recent years, especially in our woke agenda, our woke society. Self-victimization seems to be cool all of a sudden. It never used to be cool when I was growing up, but now all of a sudden it is. And we are seeing a drastic decline in those who can't take responsibility for their part in life and everything else. So, this is part two of self victimization. And before we get started, we're just going to take a quick break here.
Hi guys, when I'm having a real bad day, I like to open up the Vibe Resonate Wellness app. I can always find something that just help me get through that day. Now, whether it's an emotional drain that I've had or be back on track. The Vibe Resonate Wellness Hub has everything you need to get you back and on track. So what is it? Well, let's take a look here. Now we have stuff for emotional upset. We have stuff for even couples work. We have frequency therapy. We have holistic health recipes, nutritional stuff in there. We even have podcasts on topics that everyone wants to know about, whether it's news or we even have research in there. This is a central hub where you can come and find everything you need to get through. The best thing about it is it has both free and paid versions. But here's the cool thing. The paid version, you only have to pay $20 Canadian a month. And best of all Pro version members of the app get 33% off on any professional care they may need. Check out this link and install the app and see what you think. See you inside. Oh, hi. What am I doing? Oh, I'm just checking the maintenance on my indoor garden. Yeah, I have a hydroponic system here. I actually started doing this a few years ago when I started seeing the shelves of the grocery store going bare. And I was worried about how I was going to feed my family. So here I am. I'm starting another crop and I'm pretty amazed. It's doing great. It's just a few days since, maybe less than a week since I put it into my system. But you know what? I have been so excited about this new hobby of mine that I decided to write a book. Check it out here. Anyone can start a garden indoors and they can run it year round and feed their family from it. This unit here I actually got from Amazon. But I have built my own and everything. And in this book I talk about the different types of systems, and I even have a few samples on how to build your own. So check out this book here. It talks about a lot of different things, how to get started, basically just the initial things you need to know as a beginner gardener. I invite you to check it out. You can get a hold of it in either paper or digital. This is the research that I've compiled to help me get started, and I wanted to put it into one quick place for you guys to get going. So check it out, and I hope you enjoy it.
So, self-victimization, as I said before, I gave you guys a quick little story. It's near and dear in my heart. Made originally because of my own personal story, where I had to work through self-victimization over a situation. And if you're not sure what that story was, please go back to the first presentation, part one, and you will see what my story about self-victimization was. Do watch that if you're interested in what my story was. And that part one was mainly just kind of an outline description of it and an encouragement for people to get help. There's oodles of help out there. I have help on my app. I can actually, if what I do is not for you, I can also refer you to people that can help you in terms of counseling and therapy and stuff like that as well. However, moving along, I'm wanting to take a look at some information about self-victimization and the victimhood and the victim mindset, or the victimhood mindset. And then we're also going to take a caveat today and kind of look at narcissism, because there are some similar traits in both. And we're going to kind of look at that from a perspective of where the differences lie, and where the similarities lie. So, without any further ado, we're going to go into some of the first items that I have found for you. Okay, before we dive deep into this, I want to take a look at some Google definitions here. And I know Google isn't really a dictionary, but it's really handy when you're quickly looking up a definition. So we're going to look at self-victimization, first of all, as what we're talking about in this presentation here. So Google's definition is playing the victim, also known as victim playing, victim card, or self-victimization, is a fabrication or exaggeration of victimhood for a variety of reasons, such as to justify abuse to others, to manipulate others, a coping strategy, attention seeking, or diffusion of responsibility. Now, if you go over here to the right side, it says 5 reasons why toxic people play the victim. 1, to control you. 2, to get your sympathy. 3, to avoid taking responsibility. 4, to win an argument. And 5, to get attention. Now, I wouldn't say they're necessarily doing for all of those reasons, but it's probably one of those reasons. We're going to go into this in a little bit more depth, but I want to take a look at victimhood, which is kind of coming out of this whole definition. Okay, when we're looking at the term victimhood, which also can be another word for self-victimization. Victimhood, by definition of Google, is victimhood can become a part of a person's identity, but it is a learned behavior and can be changed. And if you think back to the first episode, and I talked about how I had to work on changing that whole self-victimization, that whole concept in my mind. It took some work. Okay, it goes on to say it often evolves as a defense mechanism to cope with adverse life effects. People who constantly blame other people or situations for the events in their lives have a victim mentality. Okay, so starting to make sense, isn't it? Now we're going to go into that article in a little bit more detail in a few minutes. We're going to go into this in a few more minutes, but I want to go ahead and take a look at another article before we proceed. Okay, so this article is from Scientific America, or scientificamerican.com. Now it's talking about a little bit of research, clinical research and stuff with the mindset of a victim, or the mindset of victimhood. Now, before we go on, there's an interesting little thing I want to take part in, and I want you guys all to rate yourself according to what this says. So do a quick rate. It says here, quick, how much you agree with each of these items on a scale 1 to 10. So, or 1 to 5. 1 being not me at all, and 5 being this is so me. So let's take a look at this. First of all, it is important to me that people who hurt me acknowledge that an injustice has been done to me. So how do you rate that? Is that important to you? Which would be a 5 if it's not, or it's more closer to a 1. Give it a number and then keep it to yourself. I think I am much more conscientious and moral in my relations with other people compared to their treatment of me. Where would you sit with that one? Is this very important to you? Which would be a 5, or not so much, which would be more of a 1. Be anything in between as well. When people who are close to me feel hurt by my actions, it is very important to me to clarify that injustice is on my side. Where do you sit with that? Rate it from 1 to 5. And it's very hard for me to stop thinking about the injustices others have done to me. Okay, at the bottom it says, if you've scored 4 or 5 on all of these items, you may have what psychologists have identified as a tendency for interpersonal victimhood. Interesting, hey? Okay. Now, I'm not a psychologist. We're not going to dwell on that, but it's very fun to actually do that and kind of get an idea of what your viewpoint is in life from that mindset. So, okay, we're going to go on and we're going to kind of talk about some of this. I'm going to skip this first part here. And I want to go into about the victim mindset. So, constantly seeking recognition of one's victimhood. Those who score high on this dimension have a perpetual need to have their suffering acknowledged. In general, this is a normal psychological response to trauma. So, what they're saying there is, for this is a response to trauma, and it is very important to some degree. But experiencing trauma tends to shatter our assumptions about the world as a just and moral place. And it really does, doesn't it? Recognition of one's victimhood is a normal response to trauma and can help reestablish a person's confidence in the perception of the world as a fair and just place to live. So there is a place for that, acknowledging this. But there is a big but. We're going to go on and learn a little bit more about that. Also, it is normal for victims who want the perpetrators to take responsibility for their wrongdoing and to express feelings of guilt. Hence, when I was referring in the last presentation, part 1, I was going through that as well. I wanted them to express it, but it just wasn't possible. Studies conducted on testimonies of patients and therapists have found that validation of trauma is important for therapeutic recovery from trauma and victimization. And of course, this article has a place where you can go on and see more about that. A sense of moral elitism. So this is also a feature of it. Those who score high on this dimension perceive themselves as having an immaculate morality and view someone else as being immoral. And I have to admit, I went through that stage as well when I was going through that mode. Moral elitism can be used to control others by accusing others of being immoral, unfair, or selfish, while seeing oneself as supremely moral and ethical. I would have to say I went through that. I don't know how far I utilized that, but I can admit that there is that kind of an aspect to it. Moral elitism often develops as a defense mechanism against deeply painful emotions and as a way to maintain a positive self-image. And I can see that too. As a result, those under distress tend to deny their own aggressiveness and destructive impulses and project them onto others. This is where it gets really touchy, hey? The other is perceived as threatening, whereas the self is perceived as persecuted, vulnerable, and morally superior. Now, I have witnessed this as well with working with clients from a holistic viewpoint. So it's very interesting. And as they grab hold of that self-victimization mode and they start working through it and they start changing that mindset, it's really neat how to see how they progress and work through it. Now, it's not something you can do overnight. It takes a lot of work. While splitting the world into those who are saints versus those who are pure evil may protect oneself from pain and damage to their self-image, it ultimately stunts growth and development and ignores the ability to see the self and the world in all of its complexities. And that is very true and sad. Lack of empathy for pain and suffering of others. Now, I don't know if I ever got to this point, but for some, this is very real. People scoring high on this dimension are so preoccupied with their own victimhood that they are oblivious to the pain and suffering of others. Research shows that people who have been wronged, who are reminded of a time when they were wronged, feel entitled to behave aggressively and selfishly, ignoring the suffering of others and taking more for themselves while leaving less to others. Now, as I said, I don't recall getting there. Maybe someone else would say something different about me when I was in that stage, but I don't recall that. I do recall seeing other people in that perspective. I would say completely withdrawn from the fact of others and their suffering. Emily Siddick and colleagues suggest that such individuals may feel as though they have suffered enough, so they will no longer feel obligated to care about pain and suffering of others. As a result, they pass up opportunities to help those perceived to be in their outgroup. Now, it's almost sounding like a narcissist, isn't it? But it really is. Let's just kind of take a quick break from that one and go take a look at another Google term right now. Okay, so I typed into Google narcissism versus those suffering from victimhood. And this is interesting. And we will go into this article later too, as well. At their core, both narcissism and victim mentality stem from experiences of trauma. However, the way the victim responds to this trauma differs significantly. Those with narcissistic tendencies often manipulate and exploit others for their own gain. So see, there's a very big difference. Even though the other ones may not be able to feel the pain and suffering of the others, they're not necessarily doing it from the point of exploiting others, where a narcissist may be. On the other hand, victim mentality is a response to abuse. Now, we're going to go look into that article a little bit further, but let's finish where we were here. Okay, so back into that other article. At a group level, research suggests that increased attention to an in-group's victimization reduces empathy towards the adversary as well as towards unrelated adversaries. Even just the priming of victimhood has been shown to increase outgoing conflicts, with the priming leading to reduced level of empathy towards the adversary and people being more willing to accept less collective guilt for their trauma. In fact, research on competitive victimhood shows that members of the group involved in violent conflicts tend to see their victimization as exclusive and are prone to minimize, belittle, and outright deny their adversary's suffering and pain. Very interesting. This brings up a memory of mine when I was working years later in a lab. And there was one person who would always one up or one down you. And that was because she felt her suffering was just completely uncomparable to yours, that hers, there's nothing that superseded her suffering. Now, I've seen this often with other people as well. And if you see someone who's constantly one-upping or one downing, especially one down, to make it look like their situation is so much worse. If you did a little bit of investigation, you might find, possibly, not guaranteeing it, but you might possibly find this is connected to something to do with victimhood. So I'm going to go down a little bit further, and I love to read this whole article, but we just don't have time. Consequences of a mindset, interpersonal conflict, all parties are motivated to maintain a positive moral self-image. That is very true. As a result, the different parties are likely to create two very different subject realities. As a result, the different parties are likely to create two very different subjective realities. And that's where we start hearing stuff about your truth versus my truth. The reality is there is no your truth or my truth. Reality is facts are facts. But from the perspective of each person, they may have a completely different reality or subjective reality coming from a different point of view. And honestly, that's probably where they need the help. Offenders tend to downplay the severity of the transgression, while victims tend to perceive the offender's motivations as arbitrary, senseless, immoral, and more severe. Therefore, a mindset one develops as a victim, as a perpetrator, has a fundamental effect on the way the situation is perceived and remembered. Gabay and his colleagues identify three main collective biases characterize the tendency of interpersonal victimhood, interpretation, arbitrary or attribution, and memory biases. All three biases contribute to a lack of willingness to forgive others for the perceived transgressions. And I think that's key. It's perceived transgressions. And, you know, going back to my situation, even though I have done the work and moved on, I have seen things come up. Fortunately, they haven't set me back into the self-victimization, but it comes down to perceived transgressions. And I have to remind myself that I am no longer in that place and that I've done the work. And even though they may have received perspective, I do too. And I have done the work to move on. And it's not in my control what they do from that point on. So, okay, that is one article. This article is found at scientificamerican.com. Okay. In that last article, we talked about narcissism, and there seemed to be a little bit of a correspondence with narcissism. So I want to just read the first part of this article, and it looks like I would have to log in. Medium, I believe, is social media, open source, or I guess it's decentralized. I believe it's a decentralized social media. I get a lot of emails from it, so I obviously have an account, but I haven't been on it forever. So we're going to take, it says it's a member-only story. I haven't logged in, but we're going to read the first little part of it. So narcissism versus victim mentality, two sides of the same coin. So abuse and mental health are two topics that are often intertwined, especially when discussing the effects of narcissism and victim mentality. Both can be damaging to one's well-being, but they manifest in very different ways. So remember, we talked about that Google clip, or I don't want to call it a definition, but it was a Google excerpt on it. This is coming from this article here. While narcissism is often seen as a personal disorder characterized by inflated sense of self-importance and a lack of empathy. Notice we talked about victim mindset has a lack of empathy. Okay, this says that victim mentality is more of a coping mechanism for those who have experienced abuse versus a personality disorder. So interesting, hey? Okay, however, the line between the two can be sometimes blurred, leading to the question, are narcissism and victim mentality actually two sides of the same coin? Let's explore the similarities and differences between these two concepts and how they can impact both the individual and those around them. Okay, understanding narcissism and its impact. Narcissism is not only an inflated ego or a self-absorbed personality trait. It runs much deeper, affecting the core individual beings and influencing their reaction or their interaction with the world. Research in the field of psychology have revealed that narcissism is indeed a personality disorder. It stems from a deep-seated need for validation and an insatiable desire for admiration. Those with narcissistic tendencies often display an exaggerated sense of self-importance, believing that they are superior to others. Empathy and genuine concern for others are lacking as they view themselves as the center of the universe. This distorted perception of reality causes them to manipulate and exploit those around them for their gain. Okay. Now, there seems to be a little bit of exploiting in the other two, but it's from a different perspective, is what they're saying. And the impact of narcissism can be far-reaching and devastating. Individuals in relationships with narcissists often find themselves caught in a web of emotional terror and violence. And I can honestly say that I know several people that have dealt with that. And it, for some of them, is very terrifying. It takes a long time to get a sense of self back after that. Some narcissists are much worse than others. Now, I am not a psychologist. I don't diagnose it, but I have found some important tools to help people work with that. I have to say that the narcissist does have to want to change. And the chances of you getting that narcissist to change their perspective is probably slim to none. The narcissist's constant need for validation leaves their partners feeling devalued, unseen, and unheard. The emotional wounds inflicted by the narcissist abuser may be invisible to the outside world, but they leave deep scars on the victim's psyche. Now, you can go into this if you're a Medium subscriber, and you can actually learn more about this. I am again going to post the link to it in my app in the research area. Research and reports is not necessarily, I haven't read the whole report, so I don't know if it's research or not, but it's probably good information for people to look into. Okay, lastly, we're going to go into WebMD. Although I am holistic minded, I do like to go into WebMD sometimes for some background information medically, or so I know kind of a perspective of something maybe. WebMD can have some stuff that goes contrary to holistic health, but on the other hand, it does contain a lot of good background information. We're going to take a look at this. And what is big mentality? Okay, so just as precursor, this is what does a victim mentality mean? Why be a victim? Signs you have a victimhood mindset. How to stop being victim. So there's a lot of good information in this article, and that kind of summarizes what this article does, or what this article is about. So let's go start picking apart some of it from this in this article, and I found it was actually really good helpfulness, and you might find it really good to help you guys if you feel you or someone else you know is dealing with the victimhood mentality. So we all have our ups and downs in life, and that's true. Bad things might happen to you and people you know on a daily basis, and we all see that, right? But there are some people who claim it is never their fault. They argue that they have no control over the tough situations and the problems that they encounter. It's simply always happening to them. I'm going to comment about that a little later, but the truth of the matter is Under normal circumstances, that is not true. You do have control over stuff. But there is a certain energy you can exert that attracts that to you. And we'll talk about that a little later in the article. Victimhood can become a part of a person's identity. I'm going to stop right there because any kind of disease or diagnosis or mental health condition can become a part of someone's personal identity. And to shake that can be a big problem. When I say to shake that, often this can be rectified through proper wellness choices. I guess there's no better word than that. But when a person uses it as their identity, that usually never happens unless they have a sudden change of mindset. Okay, so victimhood can become a part of a person's identity, but it is a learned behavior and can be changed. Key word there, can be changed. It often evolves as a defense mechanism to cope with adverse life effects. People who constantly blame other people or situations for the events in their lives have a victim mentality, as we were seeing from the articles, the other articles that we looked through. What does a victim mentality mean? Okay, obviously, it's not my fault. That's the attitude, eh? Some who act from a place of victimhood claim things that happen to them are the fault of someone or something other than themselves. It might be the fault of their partner, family, coworker, friend, or the way the world is. Okay. They frequently complain about the bad things that happen in life, and they are reluctant to take personal responsibility, asserting their circumstances aren't in their control. Okay, we see that with most self-victimization mindsets. We also see a trend in the world where the woke society is pushing this mindset. And I commented on this briefly in part 1, that this has become a problem. And we see this in certain cultural groups. We see this in certain ethnic groups. This is being pushed, and it's brought into existence stuff like critical race theory and everything else. I'm not going to go into detail in that, but to give you a little bit of a story, it enables people who may have not normally been this way to behave badly. Almost a year ago, I was in a laundromat. Yes, I'd been doing my clothes in a laundromat because I hadn't purchased a new washing machine yet. I was in the middle of renos. And I was accused of being white privileged. Nothing was ever said about race. All I simply did was ask the lady if I could use a little 2-foot spot on a 12-foot table to lay my clothes down because the dryer didn't have a cooling mechanism or an anti-wrinkle mechanism on it. And she yelled and screamed and called me white privilege and eventually threw me to the ground. This is stemming out of the woke society. And what I mean by this is they are giving permission for people to play the victim, and it's setting people against each other. That is a big problem. And it's paving way for racism. And when I say racism, I'm not saying just racism to those with darker skin than me. It's building racism towards the lighter skinned people as well. We really need to watch this victim mentality because it's destroying us as people in general, as a community, as citizens of our countries and everything else. We need to come together and recognize that we have differences culturally and support each other as best we can. Yes, I'm anti-woke because I see how it's destroying our society. And the victim mentality is immersing itself in our society, and it's not a good sight. Okay, I am going to move on here. Now, they're saying this is not a martyr complex. I'm not going to go into this, but basically the difference between a martyr complex and victimhood is martyr is they'll do everything they can as it says on a person with a martyr complex will often go out of their way to take on extra class or extra tasks for other people, even if they don't want to. They sacrifice themselves, basically. So it's a little bit different. Unhealthy coping mechanisms, people have a victim mentality, have often suffered through trauma and hard times, but haven't developed a healthy way to cope with it. And that basically is what comes down to it. I saw that in my own life and everything. As a result, they develop a negative view of life where they feel that they do not have any control over what happens because they don't think anything is their fault. They have little or no sense of responsibility in their lives. It just happens to them. Now, a caveat to this, and I was referring to, okay, it says here some people try to offer help or solutions and they don't, and they're often prepared with a list of reasons why it does not work. And I see that often. But a caveat to this whole negative view of life, you reap what you sow. And if you're putting, if they're having an idea that everything happens to them and they have no control, everything is going to happen to them. They're putting out that negative, unhealthy energy, and they're attracting negativity, which is only going to get them to spiral down further. So that is the caveat. That is, if they haven't learned the mechanism to divert that negative thinking, things are just going to keep happening. Why be a victim? Here are some benefits to it. No accountability. I'm not going to read them all, but basically no accountability. They don't have to take accountability to anything that's happened to them, or anything they do. There's secondary gain. They can get attention, sympathy, and everything else. And that's often what you see with them. They're looking for that attention or sympathy. But it only goes so far because people will start moving away from you. They will start pushing away from you if you have that negative attitude in life. It satisfies an unconscious need. People with victim mentality, especially when it comes to past trauma, unconsciously seeking validation from and help from others, they play the poor me card consistently. This can generate sympathy and help from others. Now, you see that in the woke society today. They're doing it to generate sympathy to get what they want. And after a while, it's just going to stop working. And they're going to get madder and madder and madder. And they avoid taking risks. Projecting blame on others is a key part of victim mentality. It's a way of avoiding being truly vulnerable and taking risks. And I saw that in my own self, the avoiding taking risks. And I've had to work through that. It's just a process. Signs that you have a victim mindset. I'm just going to go over these, but you blame others for the way your life is. You can truly think life is against you. You have trouble coping with problems in your life and feel powerless against them. You feel stuck in life, approach things with a negative attitude. You feel attacked when people try to offer helpful feedback. Feeling bad about yourself gives you relief or pleasure, and you attract people who blame others and complain about their life. Now, I'm going to stop at that one right there because I was in that situation, and I remember before I found out what was going on fully in my situation, I remember attracting one person into my life that also had a problem. She actually sought me out. And in the long run, I'm not going to go into the details of it. She sought me out because she was looking for justification on her feelings and everything else. And she was literally going after people and attacking them through different mechanisms on the internet. And tried to pull me into that, and I gave in for a little while, and then I backed off. And then at one point we decided to go together to do this one project. Years later, I've run into this person. I haven't talked much with her. Just in passing. I don't really have the ill feelings against her, but I look back at it after going through my own healing process, and I see that this isn't about me. It is about her journey in life and where she needs to go. The interesting thing is, I have run into in my travels the person that she was attacking online through the use of other people. And that person isn't at all what she said. Now, I can't leave judgment on the situation, but I can say that person is a really good person. And I respect that person. And I don't know, I'm happy to say the other person is my friend. I'm not saying that the original person is not my friend, not a close friend anymore. When you attract people who blame others and complain about their life, we both attracted each other. And that's not something you want to do. It is okay. Lastly, it is difficult for you to examine yourself and make changes. And that last point, I can see that other person that I was in that story I was just talking about, she struggled with that. And I don't know if she still does. We have not talked about the situation. I do not want to talk about the situation, but that is her journey to deal with, not mine. Okay, how to stop being a victim. Okay, these are just general, and I'm not going to read them all. I'm not going to read all the information in them, but it does refer to you need to take responsibility. You need to do self-care and compassion. You have to start saying no. And I'm just going to read that one. You can say no to something you don't want to do. It's okay. And I agree with that. If you don't feel right about it, just don't do it. Even if others people feel you are letting them down, take care of your energy and prioritize yourself. And that is so important, guys. You need to take care of yourself. And you need to educate yourself. Read books. It says here, read books, consider seeking therapy. Therapy is important because this is not giving you the how to. It's just kind of giving you kind of some stages, some things that need to be worked on. Seeking help from a therapist or someone in holistic health, someone in the area that I work in, anyone in those kinds of areas can help guide you through it. So I recommend you find what works for you. Some people don't like the talk therapy. Some people do. If there's a trauma involved, you might have to find an alternative therapy, and that's okay. No worries on that. But it's important. The key thing is you need to find what works for you. Now, again, with this article, I'm going to post it in the app after the podcast. And feel free to read the apps in full. And I tried to summarize a little bit of it. The first ones I read a little bit more directly in it. This one, I tried to more summarize it, but there are some really good points in this. Okay, so thank you for taking part in this part 2 of self-victimization. Now, I'm honestly not sure if we're going to do a part 3. At this point, I don't think so, but who knows? Maybe I'll be working on something in my renovations at home, and all of a sudden something will just pop in my mind that I forgot to talk to you guys about, and maybe I'll come up with a part 3 at some point. I thank you for watching, and I'm going to encourage you guys to check out my app because there is some good trauma-based, fear-based stuff that can have a healthy mindset within my app that might help get you started. And as was said in the previous sponsor clips that I had here, those who are wanting to have further professional help by becoming a pro version in that app for a very minimal amount a month, you can get 33% off of booking an appointment with me. And yes, I do evening appointments, so not to worry. Anyhow, I want to wish you guys the best of the week, and we will see you in the next episode. Have a great week.